Okay, yeah. It's good for record.
So for the recording, this is I'm Peter Kaminski, and you are,
Nathan Cruz of Great Work Alliance.
and this is the first time we're chatting together one-on-one. It's 2021, May 13th. It's nice to see you, Nathan.
Now the talk fizzles.
Well, and so we bumped into each other on at Cicolab. I think it was me doing the massive wiki hot seat thing, right? Um, so Cicolab is cool. I don't know much about Great Works Alliance. You maybe don't know much about Massive Wiki. We've probably both got other interesting things. Actually, you just rambled through a whole bunch of connections, and I knew about 15% of the ones that you rambled through, um, and vice versa. I've got probably a bunch of connections that you don't know about that maybe you want to.
Like Ted of Tiddlywiki, I'm only referencing him from watching his interview with the guys over at Floss Weekly. And
I don't know who Ted from
I'd love to
Tiddlywiki
connect
is.
with him.
What's that?
And I brought him up to David Boville of FedWiki and mentioned, hey, I noticed that he's like over there in London with you. Have you guys ever had a chance to get together? And he's like, oh yeah, we're actually planning on having a drink soon. And then I
So
got some feedback. It went really well as far as I understand.
the Tiddlywiki person I know is Jeremy Reston.
Yeah,
Is Ted?
that's who I meant.
Oh, okay, cool.
Sorry.
Cool. I know Jeremy from way back in the day when we were both doing wikis together, or wikis separately. But anyway, I love Tiddlywiki. Tiddlywiki is awesome. So David wants to bump Jeremy and I into each other. Tiddlywiki and Massive Wiki go well together. David's doing FedWiki, and there's another community, from the FedWiki folks out, kind of, and they all actually do work well together, or they will work together well.
That's awesome. Like getting connected throughout as broad of the wiki community overall as possible would be just staggering.
Yeah. And
So
this is another one of those things where um uh FedWiki is a project by Ward Cunningham, and Tiddlywiki is a project by Jeremy Rustin, and Massive Wiki is a project by Peter Kaminski. All of us were in a previous generation of the wiki world, right? Back in the early 2000s, we were doing wiki things back then, each of us. Ward came up with the idea of the wiki, of course. But so in some sense, none of us has lost that thread, but the wiki world actually had some coalescence around 2005 or something like that, and then it kind of slowly drifted back apart again, and has been kind of really spread out. So it's fun to start seeing little twitches starting to come together, and I hope it keeps stitching itself back together, because it's awesome.
Two people I would love to learn if you've ever had any contact with or learned about their projects that I'd like to see if I can maneuver you guys together a bit is like Jordan Larson of Civil X, and I think it's civilx.world.
Yeah.
And he's involved with Solar Punk Society, which is like that they just had Solar Fest or Solar Punk Fest held in person down over there in Texas, just outside of Houston. But they have a magazine going on, and then there's also Interest Warehouse there in Texas also, and then there's Brandon and his crew over at Plan Systems, which are working on spatial distributed architecture. So kind of similar to like what Threefold and Holochain and a bunch of the others are doing, yet they're focusing primarily through the visual and spatial aspects essentially on a tabular setup for the UI and integrating music into it. So a lot of the stuff that's going to go into like the digital mood ring type technology that we're hearing about right now that goes into the health and the wellness and engaging where you currently are in order to move forward. They're integrating that too. And Brandon's crew, from what I understand, it's like they're using Onode. They've got a GitHub up and everything like that. Go for the primary language, and Unity with open architecture. And so,
what's Brandon's name again?
I don't want. I'm spacing out right now, but I'll get you
an affiliation.
Yeah.
What organization is he got?
That's Planet Systems.
Planet Systems.
Plan. Like you're planning a guide, for
Planet
example.
Systems. Yeah.
Yeah. Really cool crew. He's got some veterans on board too, including himself. He's ex-Air Force.
Yeah, Brandon Wallace.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and Jordan on the Civil X side, he's focusing going through Unity also, and they're into it a couple levels. They've been exploring an avatar system, and of course, when you hear that, I know exactly what you're thinking about: autonomous profiles. Yes, like we're all on the same page with that, and so, like where we're coming from is very similar to what you're doing. Is positively networking through the relationships that we are able to build. Yep. Connecting people of similar credibility levels, trying to fine tune, okay, who's the optimal fit with this other person to have as wide and broad knowledge, aptitude, and offerings to bring to the table to the other one. So it's built on a mutual reciprocity model.
Very cool.
All great people.
So then you want to know about Vincent Arena and Trove.
Had a couple minutes with him already.
Awesome.
It's going fabulously.
And then Vincent and I together, we have kind of a collective of organization of organizations called Flotilla. Maybe we haven't bumped into each other in Flotilla. There's a really small group called Flotilla, which is me and Vincent and a few other people working together on tools for connectors. Actually, is the tagline. Helping people find each other through directories and through matchmaking, and some IT, like information organized, and some human stuff. So
I love what you guys have come up with so far. I'm not an Airtable person. I've always tried to stay away from that stuff because, like, when Airtable first came out, I looked at it and I just about puked. Like, for its layout and everything. He and I just ranted to him the other day about it. Like, I'm doing what I can to get over it. And I know he's already said that, working on the bare bones and the tooling of it right now for the integration side, what can be done and what could be added as primary focus over like the UI and the UX. That's obvious to me. And as soon as some of that stuff is more available, I think it'll be a lot easier for anybody at any curve to start adopting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Vincent has well, I do a bunch of Airtable stuff myself. Vincent is an Airtable genius. So there's and the thing that he's genius about is actually understanding the way relational data works, kind of just intuitively, natively. He didn't study for that, unlike most of us who know about relational data, but he has kind of an intuitive grasp of it. And it's actually, I'm not sure that it's something that everybody, I'm not sure it makes sense to everybody, kind of. Which, there's different I don't know. All of us have different, different things that we're like superpower at, and then the rest of it is kind of like, yeah, I'm okay at that kind of stuff. So everybody has their superpower, and then superpowers are often super weaknesses, and you know,
Right. Excellent point. Yes, the more we're able to quickly identify where we're able to align, even if it's just like an interest or a fringe area where it's just a hobby, it's not my primary passion or anything like that, it's going to be very beneficial to everybody.
yep,
Shorten up a lot of tracks, paths,
yep,
minimize fires and monkey wrenches.
yep, yep,
Like just getting to know a group, for example, if you can hone in on the type of people, like the caliber of them, as like a descriptor for a group,
yep,
immediately have recognition of like a four track of what's going to happen, what to
yep,
expect.
yep,
Like, no, ask. So that kind of brings it over into the mindless state of like those dating apps, swipe left or swipe right.
yeah. So how do you I forget who is working on matching caliber, different, similar calibers of people. But how do you judge, or how do you express, the caliber of a person?
I guess it depends on what perspective or lens you're using to describe it, and maybe where you are in life. Uh, like that's the Great Works MVP that Lyra and I have worked so hard on so far for
Yeah,
what's available to see to date. Like we've seen the circular actions of what happens when you go off just an idea and try to run with it as if that's actually the way the world operates. So I was a very strong proponent of saying we need to get the research, and as much of the research from one end of the initialization, the conceptualization, like in papers, and what kind of paper is it? What's the highest priority paper that's going to be most adopted from anywhere and recognized? If it's recognized only in the journalistic lens or realms, or up into academics, into uh, education, government levels, and supervisory levels, like a council board to whatever initiative is contracted. So we're like, okay, where's the research? What's the best? And then what's the most neutral that defines humanity that we can all identify and adapt? Doesn't matter how old you are, you inherently like know these things. Like do no harm, right? And we all identify with the golden rule, and that translates in another way to the laws of reciprocity is and justice. It's all about balance, and while um, having at its core full autonomy at the same time.
yep,
It's not just about you as one individual and you are God of that universe, but how do you share that with other people that have the same permission levels and levels of autonomy that you have as like your potential? Yet at the same time, it has to be dynamic to that person, in so many different levels of like, okay, well, what what's the broad scope of capabilities of a child, and at what level within a child at 6 years old is every 6 year old equal to another? Do they all know and learn and able to implement the same things at the same level of aptitude or strength? What about the differences between a lean guy like myself and a linebacker? The linebacker might be one amazing dude in his own right, and I might do the same, but in a very different way. Like I might be all brain and geeky and everything, and I have these different abilities to analyze patterns and relationships and durations, estimates, stuff like that. How long might this go? Almost like chess moves. And this other guy is like, hey, you can't handle moving that tree out of the way after it's fallen in our path. Or maybe he's an amazing listener and comforter that helps bring you into your Zen zone where you can completely purge the weight of whatever scenario you're feeling right now and help bring you back up to your optimal. Like that, we all have amazing attributes that we all can share. And the more we can appreciate those things and realize how they align and complement, even though they may not be identical, like verbatim, that's what explains and shapes what we as humans are. If we look at the core human elements and accept and embrace the diversity, that's a rainbow right there. That's a picture of the universe. It's a picture of how we're built and designed without being able to argue that in any kind of sensical way.
Yeah.
Like we all have cells. We all have white cells, blood cells, red blood cells. We've all got marrow and eyes, 2 hands, arms, and legs. You know, yet at the same time, you've got a little bit different, unique structure of silver in your hair than I do. Yep. I'm not wearing glasses right now. I'm wearing contacts, and you're wearing glasses. Like all those different fine-grained details, a lot of people, because of the way society's been over however many decades you want to count, qualify, you know, we're the essence of beauty with the keys to the universe. And I just think it's amazing when we're able to unlock those things together.
So have you and Lyra figured out how to represent those things to each other? Or, and a lot of times people don't even know that what they have themselves, right? Sometimes other people know better what you can do or what you're good at and what you're bad at.
Right. Getting a third party perspective is always a phenomenal tool. To get back to my point before I went off on the tangential side, yes, we started with the golden rule and positive psychology to identify those core traits that do most align, according to our research, the human condition. Courage, integrity, wisdom, different ways of shaping the caliber or recognizing the caliber. And I've got a medical background, and so I really had this great vision I'd like to see come to fruition on the visual mapping side and graphics. It's like, let's overlay the biomechanics and neurology that we're able to identify and observe through scientific method and look at like the synaptic level where things are firing off, cross-firing, and then overlap that according to what we're able to recognize on a human level across these different spectrums. As say, you've got 6 different pillars that are your primary neurons that fire in any given sector. Kind of like a certain grouping of neurons focus on one part of the brain, or a chakra level that you're able to identify through certain harmonics and how it's able to be observed and responsive through the body. Not just your heart rate, your pulse, and your respiration, but also like any neurological changes, any kind of changes that affect your immune system, your response, the vagal nerve system, which goes into maybe unlocking our ability to identify, adapt, and overcome through resilience. So positive psychology, and we've done some cross correlation in how it's been able to be implemented, not just research, but implemented, and including in very successful organizations like the Positivity Project, for example, and Team Red, White, and Blue. Those are our core organizations that we've modeled after without even contacting them. I know a couple of the people over there, and I wanted to be able to put into my contribution to bring to them and say, hey, what do you guys think? What do you guys like? And would you like to extend what you've already built in amazing ways, like in these schools, in early education, out and then over into like Team Red, White, and Blue? They're identifying any kind of responder in essence, whether it's an instructor, a teacher, a nurse, an officer, someone in the fire department, that a servant of the community is recognized as a hero, not just veterans.
Yeah.
It's veteran initiated at the core and brought out. Like if you can identify with how a veteran has gone through all these trials and tribulations and brought out the best of themselves in the military, we can do that with the rest of the community too, because they're all so important.
Yep.
And so the essential direction we're going with Great Works Alliance is a lot of us are Trekkies. I have no doubt that you're a Trekkie.
Yep.
Or a sci-fi fan.
Yep.
Into it, comics and everything. What if we were able to manifest through what we're able to observe right now? Like now we have the sixth branch of the military for Space Force. It kind of looks like the twinge beginning of Starfleet Academy and the Starfleet Federation, right? And then we're looking at all these other directions of what's being identified and addressed and implemented through these different projects. And like in the tech realm, like with AI, the largest problem over the past, couple decades has been programmer bias, which brings up the fear of what happens when we get this autonomous AI level. Are they going to be an advocate for us? Or are they going to be a slave? Are they going to, start attacking everybody? We're like, okay, well, if we can plug in between some of those spaces and get a good relationship between the different projects that are really strong already, we're building that neural network for the human condition, all of humanity, yet ripples out in the same expectations that we have for ourselves and can set for each other. So that can ripple out into like the geo community and Gaia. How do we interact with Mother Nature and our resources to optimize our own environment? And then what if we run into some aliens, if they exist, right? What if we're running with depopulation or overpopulation? Okay, well, if we've got an AI that were to say something like, well, A, B, or C are my options to go ahead and trim out because they're too detrimental for the overall thing and my core objectives that I have set in line. If we can implement something that's basic yet detailed enough and resilient enough to go as far out into the granular states, the fine-grained stuff that's really fringe and you think it doesn't matter, we could come up with something maybe like a scenario where the AI says, okay, instead of killing off entities or whatever, humans or sheep, or bees, to keep things balanced through Gaia and these different quadrants, like I need to focus on human as a priority or as an equal to a cow or a blade of grass, maybe figuring out options to export and colonize different areas, since we don't necessarily have to be limited to the planet. Or maybe it would be great to go ahead and relocate some of these resources to other areas that have not been highly detailed or researched, like the aquatic areas in the oceans, do deep sea exploration and revitalization of our own area. What if we were to redirect some geothermal transfer system, so it's not just at that one singular location, but daisy chain it, not just for where we want to be colonizing, but for the ultimate benefit of the planet's circulation.
Sounds good.
There. So the SoulSpark game is to Lyra came up with it after I put in the research that I did, and it's just so many levels. What's the best way we can think of that can keep people entertained, invited to co-develop and refine, and facilitate some of these basic needs that a lot of people have hardships with, like onboarding, for example, getting to know yourself, doing some self-introspection, minimizing negatively perceived judgment. And if we can have the person focus on themselves, recognizing wherever they are right now, and then an idea pops into their head that correlates with what they're interested in, like their passions. So they can set a goal and do that through micro goals, just through daily or weekly inflection or social engagement at the same time. We can get onboarding accomplished. We can keep it fun. We can have them non-clinically be working on themselves to optimize themselves, as well as recognize other people like them in one sense or another that they want to explore. So building explorers is one key aspect we would like to co-encourage.
Building explorers, people who are exploring.
Explorers and leaders.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
We'd like to, when we get to that point, or other people want to join into that one aspect, the recognition, like all the identifiers and the characteristics and traits that correlate to different types of archetypes, and not just human archetypes, but however they're recognized through different lenses or cultures. So that correlation map can be built with accuracy and withstanding of that jurisdiction who has the ultimate authority and grounds, because they lived it, and that's what they're perpetrating. That's what they're keeping forth, because they should be not just identifying with it, but following through with it too. And if they're able to share that with others, there's a lot of peacekeeping built in right there.
Yeah.
Do you really come to the table where I'm joining you as a friend, or are you somewhere further away?
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to be hesitating of, okay, is this gentle Ben or a wolf in sheep's clothing?
Yep. And you can't listen to somebody to describe what they are. You kind of have to watch what they do.
Yeah. What would you like to talk about next?
I don't know. I feel like I could talk about this stuff. Well, maybe actually I was going to distract myself a little bit, but maybe if there's stuff that we should work on together is kind of the background of what I'm interested in talking about. But there's a lot of what you described goes along with, I have a completely different way of describing it and working through it and stuff like that. But it sounds a lot like the mechanisms are, generally the same idea. Um, and so a little bit earlier in the call, there's an open question for me, and it is like, oh yeah, that's the open question, like how are you guys looking at that challenge, and how are you thinking of meeting it and stuff like that? But I've kind of forgotten what it was. But let me try to remember it. Um, so uh, so definitely one of the problems is finding each other, finding people, and then figuring out how you meet up, and there's um Trove has got its way of doing it, and then I've got my ways of thinking about how we do it, and you've got yours. So think I feel like we're all working well on that. That's good. Um, mm, um, in my circles, we call it sovereignty instead of autonomy, but that's kind of the same thing. Actually, you mentioned something about
Yep.
autonomous AIs. That one is interesting to me, and actually, I don't bump into many people who are interested in it. Um, so maybe that's one place I can at least talk about something. Autonomous AIs to me is an interesting problem, and I've just kind of like, it's gonna, like, I can tell it's gonna happen. Um, and I can tell that we're not prepared for it. But then I've had this question of like, why do I feel like we're not prepared for it, right? Because an autonomous AI, either we can, to put it in very crass terms, we can either unplug all of them or delete their files or whatever, theoretically, or maybe they want to have war with us, but then it's like we're not competing over the same resources, kind of, right? I don't care about their disk space and they don't care about my food, so can't we all just get along, kind of? But what I started thinking was I don't worry that autonomous AIs are going to take over or that we're going to kill them all. What I really worry about is actually the conflict that we're going to find ourselves in when there are autonomous AIs and when they are birthed out of different kinds of people with different thoughts about how this the relationship between autonomous AIs and humans should be, right? So say I'm an evil scientist. I've got I'm graduated out of Google and Facebook and I don't know, Amazon or something. I know a lot about autonomous AIs. I'm building my own. Mine is going to win, right? So that's one way that we can end up having bad things happening by a human teaming up, or a set of humans, more likely. Set of humans team up with a set of AIs, or you can look at it the other way around. A set of AIs team up with a set of humans, and they decide that there's a bunch of uncertainty and we're going to make sure that we win, right? Um, and that's something that the collection of those entities is going to inherit from our wonderful system of capitalism and conquest, and all the places that the human race has kind of like cornered itself into not the best mental state. Um, anyway, so the thing I ended up deciding, I don't know if I explained it very well, but I ended up deciding I don't know what's going to happen 100 years later, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to start having autonomous AIs, and then because of the way the human race is currently situated within itself, we're going to have wars. We're going to have wars, right? And I don't think we need to. I think so. I guess the part of me that worries about autonomous AIs, when I'm not worried about climate change or soil health or water or insects or whatever the other existential threats that we all face. The part of me that's worried about autonomous AIs, it's not really so much what's going to happen 100 years from now. It's actually once it gets interesting, and we start fighting. And what I mean by we is it's mostly humans fighting with each other about AIs or something like that, rather than, it's not really between the AIs and the humans. It's really about sets of humans and maybe sets of AIs that humans have helped set up, right?
So, have you pictured um, something like the War Games scenario from the
Yeah,
1983 movie,
yeah.
or the scenario on TV of the show Person of Interest?
I'm not sure if I know that one.
Oh, oh yeah. Please do watch. I think you'll find it amazingly interesting and well thought out in a number of different ways. They're essentially
Yeah,
got
I
this.
watched that. Yeah,
Okay, the the light and dark AIs.
yeah. The uh one of the things I worry about is that I've had the past 20 or 25 years I've worked on collaboration systems for people, both process and software tools and things like that, right? And helping people learn to collaborate better, work together better, like share information better, share knowledge, do sense making together and stuff like that. That's been a big part of my life for the past 20, 25 years. So, and kind of at the end of most recently in the last 3 4 5 years, I've felt pretty depressed, because what I have learned is you can give an individual or a group a set of tools that works well, that helps them think better together, and for whatever reason, the membership of the group changes, or the task that one person or a group finds themselves having to do or something like that, they fall really quickly out of using the tools, right? um, so it's kind of like, you get this group intelligence going, and then it devolves. It almost always devolves, right? And going back to a guy named Doug Engelbart, which maybe you know, maybe you don't. Doug Engelbart was working on the same problem in the 60s, and he thought he had it solved. Actually, he's like, "Oh, guys, all we have to do is bootstrap this thing together, and we're good. We're good to go. We can solve a bunch of the problems that were facing the world even back in the 60s, right?" And so, and then he ended up living a life seeing that nobody would, he was too far ahead of the curve. Nobody understood what he was doing. They understood little bits and pieces of it, but they didn't get the whole thing, right? And it turns out that you would think that you could create a group consciousness with a bunch of humans, but it actually doesn't work very well. And whole nother thread, the interesting thing to me is that humanity is kind of in a war with social structures, is maybe one way to think of it, or superorganisms is another way to think of it. So the
Well, right
superorganism,
after
what's that?
right now, we're right after the huge movement of I want to use 10,000 different tags for myself and how I identify, which tends to convolute what we're trying to do right now.
Yep.
So the waters have essentially been muddied, that we get to go ahead and try to reconstruct and re-engineer while people are in that mindset. Go on. Yes.
The
Very, very
so I look back over, a couple thousand years of history, and what I see is these organizational structures forming. So, so first we had, first we were all living in like family groups and tribes and stuff like that, wandering the earth and growing a little bit here and killing animals a little bit there, and everybody was kind of happy. But then you get agriculture, and you get surplus of food, which means you have to figure out how to kind of guard the surplus, and then you end up with this stratification of social layers, um, and then priest layers and things like that, and then you end up with like trade and debt and payments and tithing and taxes and a bunch of stuff. All of those things are kind of not good or bad, in and of themselves, but we started building social structures that went in an interesting direction. So we ended up with nation states, and we ended up with religions, and then we ended up with corporations, and then we turned corporations into legal persons. So corporations have the same rights as human rights, and you end up with these weird things where each of those structures, the superstructures, like all the religions ended up fighting each other, nation states ended up fighting each other, um, and from an individual perspective, you kind of want to look at that and go, well, there was this guy named Charlemagne, or where there was this guy named Hitler, or there was this guy named Churchill, or there was this guy named FDR, right? And it's like, yes and no. Kind of the social structures evolved in a way such that feudalism won out over agrarianism, and then corporatism won out over feudalism, and then nation states won out over feudalism, and to some extent corporatism, and to some extent not. Corporatism and nation statism ended up fighting to kind of a truce, and now they fight amongst themselves, kind of. So something like Google, it's partly the people behind it, and partly it's just a social structure that has evolved to grab resources and chew up resources and fight other social structures, right? Or other superorganisms. So all of that stuff ended up in this weird place where corporatism and colonialism and conquest. I think what happened in one thing that I think happened was conquest and colonialism and feudalism and stuff like that were more powerful than agrarianism, and literally those social structures wiped out the humans who had who just so all of us now who are living are the descendants of conquerors, right? Or conquestees, maybe, of either we were on the top or the bottom of the totem pole. None of us came from None of us are descendants of people who were just chilling and living life together, right? So we're all either feudal lords or serfs, and just mentally, because literally the feudalism and nation state and religious wars killed off all the people that had any other way of thinking, right? So and so we still, like you and I and everybody that we know and love, we have this echo of, can't we all just get along? Can't we all just live together in harmony? Because that seems like the natural thing to do, but then you go back out into the world and there's a bunch of people like, no, man, I need to accumulate as much gold as I can, or I need to have the right color skin and, not have the wrong color skin or whatever, right? So
I think we're just a little bit smarter than those people in being able to not just look within our own bubble, but we're intentionally zooming out.
Yeah, and crossing
Trying to
bubbles.
look
Yeah.
as much of that big picture as possible. Like, hey, dude, you're all about brown pride or black pride or white pride. Why does that really have to matter? It's like, before this conversation, we were cool.
Yeah.
And right now is a pivot point of, what do you want to do next?
Yeah.
How do you want to emotionalize and rationalize this? Where's that balance? Like, do you want to go, okay, well, I just want to stay in my own bubble? Well, at the same time, just as another brother, or another human, I can say, all the power to you. I support you in this and this and this. Do your thing. And you know what? You're so kick ass. I want you to be a part of everything that you may not be aware of, that I think you would really appreciate. The door's open. So, okay, why does that really have to be a problem? And
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to I think your descriptions and analogies of what we've been seeing it's like, to put it into different terms, almost like what we saw with VHS versus beta. or Blu-ray versus HD and how that came out. And then we have a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. We can have some hope in, hey, yeah, HD did play it out the same way in reverse. It just, everybody's going to go to HD first or whatever. And then because Sony was big enough to have more momentum and strategize it, they were able to turn the table a little bit and say, okay, now we're coming out and you're not going to push us out because we're going to be a little bit strategic in it. Like, we're going to buy up these contracts for Blu-ray exclusive rights. And if it's an either or scenario, we're going to buy out this market, basically.
Yeah.
So a lot of us, I've noticed a lot of people want to do the fluffy duffy stuff and fantasize about the utopia, or what I've dominantly seen as the agrarian culture. Because I'm a bicentennial baby. But so I was kind of like after that a little bit. I'm a Gen Xer, and just all the hippie stuff, and no doubt there was a lot more to it than it being also soft and fluffy at the time. It just wasn't the dominant face that I was able to absorb through my life education, and bringing in a lot of those people that are compatible with that realm of thought and people and how they interact with going towards the darker side on the experiences, all the hardships. People like, hey, I grew up in the ghetto. I grew up on the streets or in the tracks. I was involved with gangs and stuff, or I went to prison so many times because of this and this and this. Being able to extract the value that they do bring, or that they want to bring to the table, and make them welcome, rather than the perception that, you're just junk, you have no value to society, it is what we really need in order to have a healthy and fair, balanced perspective and initiative towards these goals. Just like with children, for example. Children may not have the experience or the aptitude to implement these high functioning ideas that they come up with. That's kind of what we're here for, as science and biology dictates anyway. Our children are a part of us, and we're there as an inherent, it's wired into our DNA, our genetics. Unless if you haven't done your research, you can't argue. The only people that are going to argue that is like those that are just assuming stuff and making it up. We're designed to be mentors, instructors, and teachers. And if we can, as a parent and like a big brother for over a couple decades, I just grew right into it, because I like seeing other people flourish. It brings me joy when I'm able to contribute to someone else experiencing a better quality of life, some sort of growth that they could be proud of and stand on. So projects like Pearls of Wisdom, mentorship notes before I pass, from a previous generation, if I can share on my best pearls of wisdom for you to have as landmarks growing through those stages that I know you're going to grow through, to shorten that track and make you the strongest person you can be, that you choose to be, it is right there, kind of on par with how we see the Library of Alexandria and how it was almost there. It was on the cusp of, or what we might envision for the knowledge base of Atlantis. Like, I'm just a bit too altruistic. I try to be really pragmatic at the same time, but I don't think that the human race has any viable limitations. And the key is staring us in the face every single day when we brush our teeth or wash our face. It's the mirror. It's all inside of us. If we can navigate that through exploring and mentoring each other, like different captains, Captain Picard and Cisco and Kirk, and all Janeway. They all get together and do their thing. That's a great example, even though it's not perfect. It's a great picture of something that's viably attainable that we can strive for right now.
I kind of think it's not attainable. um,
I'm here for you, bro.
I watch people doing their people things, right? And people, there's, I think, I think we evolved to also, we evolved, recently in the past 1,000 years or 2,000 years, have this kind of feudal lord or serf thing going on. But then before that, it makes sense actually that you want little bands of humans to work together, but then you also want some of them to break off and form another little band someplace else, right? You actually want tension inside that village, and for the teenagers to go off and go, you guys are nuts, I'm going to do it on my own. And some of them die because they didn't get enough mentoring, and some of them do something a little bit different and win and survive, right? And so that's actually something that makes a lot of sense evolutionarily. So I watch it kind of happen. You get the group mind together and then it devolves, because I think we have this tension in humans that just do that. And it's mostly a survival, it's mostly an evolutionary strategy. So then coming back to the autonomous AIs, the thing that I think is really interesting is when you get an autonomous AI that's about as smart as a human, plus or minus, it's going to be really easy to make two of them together or four of them together or 100 or 1,000, right?
Due to things
And
like code splitting, for example.
yeah.
What if we were to code split functions?
Or if you can kind of think of them as autonomous avatars or something, right? Or something.
Sure. Yeah.
But then some of them are going to be worse than humans. Some of them are only going to be as good as humans. Some of them are going to get along with other humans or other autonomous AIs a lot better than humans get along with humans, right? So we're going to end up with this interesting, there's going to be some set of autonomous AIs who maybe look and think a lot like humans, but are just much better at doing collaborative intelligence. I think that's just going to happen, and then we're going to have to deal with that. However, we end up dealing with it.
Is that where you see like an AI buddy coming in? And before you answer that, the way I've envisioned essentially or picture what you're talking about is no, we can't do things as a whole because there's so much uh, fine grained differences, and we haven't come to that point in society to smoothly and efficiently maneuver around, kind of like a magnetic ball in a group of others, to find our polarities. Um, and so I kind of look at it like we've got multiple tribes, say like Indian tribes, or we could look at sectors of elements, people that identify with a certain element, right? Um, as a whole, you generally build for a certain type of construct or governance structure with like your core beliefs or code of ethics. And because we're exploratory and curious beings and creative beings, we're always going to be moving forward saying, okay, I know that there's more out there. So I'm going to rebel against that so I can learn for myself in a way that is more meaningful to me than what you tell me or what I've observed so far. So I have to go explore outside this realm. this county or tribe. And that happens a lot, like you described, through friction or eddies. Um, Almost like I know Doc Searles describes it, and I love this analogy, as like water boiling over. That fringe point right there where it starts to foam, that's where all the activity and excitement really starts to happen. And it can be either side, the yin or the yang, all dependent on the core that's been experienced by that individual or molecule of water that goes up into the eddy and the boil over point in directing, okay, what's going to happen. And you've got these other boiling points, pots of boiling water as different tribes where they end up mixing. And so if we can embrace, I think that is just a common pattern, just like your bones grow is a common pattern we can't really argue against. This is just a part of our own definement and how we operate. I think that's one great path. We're going to find a lot more of that fluidity in maneuvering between these different structures. You know, we call Nate and Pete, you know, and it's exciting to think about what can happen when that does become more embraced. Are we going to come up with like a Kubernetes version, or Graal VM, or a Frankenstein? I love the hybridization of components, and it goes well into like one of my interests in reverse engineering in order to streamline things, because like I come from a background of quality craftsmanship. You put you into your work like an artist that you care about, your name is in it, it's imprinted into that product, whether it's recognizable by someone else or not. Something is different. Like an architect, they may not sign something, you may never see that print of their sketch that's so bombastic, but you look around town and you go, I know exactly who did that one, that one, that one, and that one, because they have their own flavor. And that's one of those things that I see you personally, as well as many others in these common circles, coming to a realization, even if they don't say it out loud, that we agree we should really embrace the different dynamics of these flavors and styles of the people that are coming in. And if we can be more receptive to that, like objectively, and then attempt to put ourselves in their shoes and another person's shoes, different perspectives, we're going to get a lot more out of it than if we were just to go ahead and debate and have circular discussions that aren't very productive. Even when that is the proposed premise of the meeting. Like, let's just go explore, even if it's circular, because doing it that way, that is like sandbagging what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And I'm also a performance enthusiast into racing and quarter mile, 8 strip, door slammers, stuff like that. So I just want to say I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you. It's cool that we're working on the same thing and that we're doing it differently.
What's your time like? I noticed that we're 5 over.
I've got like 10 or 15 more minutes.
Okay.
How about you?
How would you like to run from here?
I don't know. I think so. So I'm looking at Greater Works, the Greater Works Alliance website. It looks cool. I guess, so I think I remembered kind of what one of the grand challenges I have in my, I call it primordial soup. I think maybe, and when you say circles, I say something else. Anyway, in my primordial soup, one of the challenges that I've got, and and I don't think you have an answer for this one, but maybe you do, and maybe you don't, but maybe it's interesting as well. So you and I have both, more you than me. I didn't share too many of the people I know and connections that you might be interested in, but you know, we are actually, we're in the circles of circles of circles that I'm in, and the circles of circles of circles that you're in, we actually don't overlap that much, which is really interesting, right? Even though I think we're kind of on the same path in some way. So, so what, maybe one thing is that, you know, we start connecting more circles and getting closer to each other. But the challenge that I've got is saying hi to a new friend and then saying, here are the circles that I'm in and the ones that I think might be interesting to you, right? Somebody asked me this great question, and I was super embarrassed not to have a good answer for it. She said, this was on Monday, Trudy. Trudy said, so Pete, you just rattled off, you know, like 6 different acronym namey things for different circles that you're in. And then you talked about more circles around those, you know, you have a map of these, right? And, you know, I do a ton of diagramming. I do a ton of mapping of all the different kinds. Some of it, you know, in Airtable, literally. Some of it in wikis. Some of it in, you know, God knows what. Some of it, anyway. You know, I was like, I guess it's shoemaker's children. I don't have a map for, you know, my thing because I'm too involved in making maps for everybody else. You know, then that's a weak answer too. So then I started thinking about it pretty deeply, you know. So okay. And then I started pulling tools out of my tool chest, right? Is this Scapel? Is it Scrivener? Is it Massive Wiki? Is it, you know, Airtable? Is it Notion? Is it, you know, and all of them, is it Draw.io? And all of them is kind of like, it's not going to be able to represent, you know, this dimension of it or these, you know. So the map of it is really, it kind of feels more like a 3-dimensional thing, right? And but it's not 3-dimensional in the sticks and balls kind of way. It's like, you know, let me pull this one over. This, we call them sovereigns, these little clusters of people, autonomous organizations, sovereigns. You know, this sovereign looks really small from here, but let me readjust the view for you, you know, and blow this sovereign up, and it's got all this richness and detail. Here are the things that it's good, you know, good and bad at, and here's how that good and bad, you know, stuff that it does relates to this one over here. Let me drag that one over and make it bigger and smaller, right? And that's the map that I want, right? And you know, I can imagine that in the Star Trek universe, all of the tools that I know about, you know, it's you can make slices of that, or you know, 2Ds, you know, or you know, but it's not the same anyway. That's what I'm looking for right now.
Ditto. I have some sketches I'd like to share with you whenever we end up getting
I
some
would
time.
I would love that.
What do you think about zooming in, like some of our shared focus work together on schematics and consolidating mind maps and stuff like that,
Yeah,
building out
that would be really good. Yeah.
whatever software we currently like for whatever specific purposes,
Yeah.
and then maybe looking at that in more fine-grained detail and how those could get overlapped through a number of different ways, like licensure, for example. That's a big deal from this end.
That sounds really good.
Because of all those nightmares of being pigeonholed, you know,
Yeah.
locked into some sort of proprietary licensure, and then you get nickeled and dimed if you end up wanting the extra features that still just get you kind of a little bit closer to what you want. Still not enough. Like, we only got so much to work with.
Yeah. So looking at the Great Works Alliance website, there's a couple of things that you do interestingly here that I should borrow. You've got pillars and projects and missions and superpowers and allies. You know, those are like, oh, if I click on that, I'm going to find you know, you've created a map of yourself on the web, right? I don't have a good map of myself on the web yet, kind of. Um,
The
uh,
manual is a little bit different layout.
what's that?
The manual is a little bit of a different layout than on the site. So we did the best we could to keep it all verbatim and in sequence and everything like that, just to accommodate for the different lens, which is part of our thing, heroship and mentorship, and lenses through different perspectives to be inclusive of all of humanity's diversity, capitalize on those strengths,
Yep.
and empower those people. So thank you. You go on.
So then there's probably a bunch of really practical stuff that we can do together. I know one of the people that I'm working with, well, he's doing Neo4j and GraphQL. I actually don't know many people doing Unity, although I have a background in video game design, but it's actually like from 40 years ago. But on the other hand, actually there's a few video gamey things right now that I'm still interested in. Uh, there's a quest that we've got going on, open source licensing and spirit of intent and stuff like that. This turned up recently for us in the past couple of weeks, and we've got a team of people working on something called it's called the generative commons right now. How can we, start to put things in the commons, but make sure that it's protected and things like that. We're doing pretty well with that one right now. So you would love to hear more about that, and we'd love to have you helping us work on it. Anyway, I think maybe the thing to do is to schedule another meeting, in a week or two.
Okay.
And I will look a little bit more at your stuff, and you can look a little bit more at my stuff.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Working on schematics and representations, and figuring out how the tools can talk to each other better and things like that. That's really good for me, probably for you too.
Yeah. I agree with you on the ball and stick thing, kind of like dumbbells that we see in a lot of these tech presentations. But it
Yeah.
needs to be so much more detailed. What if we were to like mechanize that, to do some biomimicry, yet mechanize it almost like the Transformers in transformation, and you can see the bones and how everything connects,
Yeah, that would be brilliant.
interlocking locks within each of those nodes,
Yep.
that have their own nodes of themselves and stuff, but
Yep.
if anchored objectively, and like starting with semantics, I think would probably be optimal
Yep.
in visualizing that. And, oh man, that was just mind blowing. My phone's gonna die, and I know you gotta go. This has been just absolutely brilliant, man. I appreciate you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it, and it looks like we'll have lots of interesting stuff to talk about. Do you want to do the same time next week, or you want to? You can
Sure.
also hit up my Calendly. That's another good way to do it. Or
Lear's hosting the SoulSpark game on Tuesdays, 10 a.m. PST.
um,
Should I get you added to that group chat and go from
let
there?
me see what my Tuesdays at 10 a.m. usually are.
She'll reschedule when necessary. That's just the
Yeah,
primary anchor point for me.
Tuesday at 10 is good. I've at least I've like next week I've got an hour, I think, right there.
Okay.
Or actually,
And
I've got two next week.
one direction we're wanting to do, just to keep in the back of your mind, is any women that you know of that would like to pursue women teaming in lots of these different projects. I think that would be an amazing route and something that's highly necessary and overdue.
Teams of only women, or more women on teams, or
All of the above. The primary spearhead being led by women, like having a women's panel for whatever project and stuff like that, to empower them and their voice, yet while having the option to do mixed or whatever at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So whatever someone's most comfortable with, just making that available.
Awesome. That's a good one. I've got kind of good news and bad news on that front, and mostly bad news. But OGM is
Okay.
got a lot of problems that way. But it's lovely, Nate. Thank you. I'll send you the
All right.
recording.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. All right. Cheers.